Hello, Anne Coates, and welcome to Scribecraft. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's really nice to be here.
Before we get into discussing your main kind of crime thriller writings and the various other writings you do, could you tell myself and the audience a bit more about your background, your kind of past writing experience, and what inspired you to kind of turn your pen towards the world of fiction?
Right. Well, I suppose I've always written, even as a child, which a lot of people do know, lovely poetry and heart-rending stuff. But I did a degree in English and French, and when I left, I started working in publishing. But I'd had a year off in the middle, so I'd actually worked at Longman's Publishing Group on their French modern language textbooks. So that gave me an edge when I applied after I'd graduated because I'd already worked in publishing. So I got a job at Transworld Publishers. So I worked in books for some time. Then I was made redundant, and I managed to get a job at IPC magazines, and I worked for a year on a confessions magazine and wrote my first confession story and had it published. And then I moved over to Woman's Weekly and Woman and Home fiction department. And I was there for about 9 years before I went freelance. In the meantime, I had been doing freelance work. I'd translated two novels. And so I translated one novel, and I started my freelance career with the second novel, which was a spy thriller that I translated from French, and carried on working in magazines, newspapers, whoever would take me, because I've been freelance ever since. I also worked for Reader's Digest, abridging um, both fiction and narrative non-fiction. I did that for very many years. And that, I think, is a really great grounding for writers, because you learn what doesn't work, when you need to cut stuff. And I also did a short time with Orion. I think and they were called Compact Classics, and I was it was 19th century classics, and it's quite amazing the mistakes you find in books that have been going for donkey's years. It's really quite fun. But I had to cut Middlemarch in half, and I nearly had a nervous breakdown because Middlemarch is one of my favourite novels, and it got to the bit when I was actually taking out an and putting a semicolon in, and really, really paring it down. And of course, if you can take out a strand, that works quite well. But there was a professor of English who was checking up on all the all the people doing cuttings. So that was that. That's that. And then during the time that I was freelance, I did some subbing shifts for News of the World Colour magazine, Sunday magazine it was. And I was asked then to do it. I did my first big interview for them, and went and interviewed, I beg your pardon, a prostitute and a member of British Transport Police at King's Cross. And at the time, it was to link in with a documentary that was made about sort of cleaning up King's Cross, basically. It was before all the new buildings and, all that happened. So I went and met this young woman, and it was the most heartrending story you can imagine. And I wrote the story, obviously, and sent it off to them. And in the end, they didn't use it because they just said it was just too traumatic. I mean, they paid me, which was, fine. But this girl's story stayed with me, and it was just, there. And my daughter was a baby then, and one morning about 2 o'clock in the morning, I must have fallen asleep in her room in a chair, and there was a knock on my door, and I thought, oh my God. Anyway, there was nobody there, but I thought, what if? And what happened was when I interviewed the prostitute, I had to pay her in cash, and they biked me over, you know, the the money in cash. And I just handed her the envelope with my name and address on. And I thought afterwards that was a really stupid thing to do. Um, and of course, so that's what I have included in my book, which is my first book, which is called Dancers in the Wind, which is about which is about prostitutes being killed off. But that was the inspiration for it, and the beginning of Hannah Weybridge.
Wow. Well, I wanted to get into the Hannah Weybridge. I think I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I think Hannah Weybridge is the character in the series that you are best known for as an author. But before we discuss that, I have to say that that catalogue of experience, vast experience that you were talking about, I mean, it must have set you up quite well in terms of both life experience and industry experience for, you know, developing your personal writing career. It sounds like to using a sporting analogy, you had a really considerable warm-up phase before you actually got into the game.
Well, I did. I mean, as I said, I did have my first confession story published. And then after that, I couldn't get a story published for love nor money. And I wrote and wrote, and I just couldn't find the right voice, I think is really what happened. And I got a couple published here and there. And the breakthrough really was writing for Bella magazine, when they used to have at the back of the magazine, they had sort of Christina Tale, I think it was. It was 1,000 words, and that's what you had to write, 1,000 words. And it was a wonderful way of honing your skills in writing, I think, because you have to write to 1,000 words, and it's like a snapshot, not the photo album. It's just one glimpse, and you get one try at it. And I also wrote some longer fiction for them, but it wasn't romantic fiction. It was much more sort of relationship. So it could be family fiction, relationships within a family with children or something like that. So I had done a lot then. And in one of my capacities, I'd met a literary agent at a newspaper, and he said to me, if you want to write your first book, put it away, and then write your second book, because the second book is the one that you will publish. And so I did do that, and I did write the first book, which I have tried reading again. I still have it, but it's not very good at all. And so I moved. So when it was really lovely to find my voice with Dancers in the Wind. But even then, it took a long time, because I knew quite a few agents at that time, and every single one of them wanted something different. What about doing this? What about doing that? One agent even wanted me to write a horrible story about the breakup with his wife or something. I mean, it was just really odd. And I thought, oh well, and I just gave up with it. I had printed it out and just gave up. And then I think it was in 2015, it must have been. So 10 years ago now, over. I found the printout of this story in my drawer, and I thought, oh, I'll have a read of that. So I read it, and I thought, this is not the best thing, but I think I've got the basis of a really good book. So then I started rewriting, and it took forever because, obviously I had to key it all in again and everything. And moved on. Well, I wrote the first 3 chapters as well of the next book, but I'd forgotten that I'd written the first 3 chapters of the next book. And eventually I got a publisher, Matthew Smith at Urbane, liked it and said, oh, I can see this as a trilogy. And I thought, wow, that's good. And I then saw that I'd already got 3 chapters of the next book. And so I went on. So I did the trilogy. Then it went on to 4. So it went on to a series. And that's how it's progressed. But what I have found is that when you were saying about my background and things that I've worked on, stories that I've worked on as a journalist have given me insight into what I can write about, if you see what I mean. I'm also very blessed with friends who are medical, in the Met, and anybody else, schools and things like that. So when I've needed specialists, as it were, or experts, I'm very lucky to be able to call on them for research.
Fascinating. So, before we discuss your process and how you go about your plotting, your craft, and so forth, could you tell myself and the audience a bit more about Hannah Weybridge, the character, and the world in which she occupies? Can you tell us a bit more about that, please?
Yeah, sure. Hannah, well, is obviously based on me initially because I was the journalist who interviewed the prostitute. Um, she isn't me. She's bits of me. And it's, I always sort of refer to Virginia Woolf's explanation about characterization and everything is that everything you've read, everything, everybody you've spoken to, everything you sort of percolate through your system and you see it through a prism and it is part of you. So yes, lots of it is bits of me. And when people, I find it quite irritating, sort of some friends, oh, it's you, and I said, no, not always. And I said, but all my characters are me, really. So I'm the nasty ones as well. I'm also the murderer. So remember, I'm the murderer too. Um, so Hannah lives in 1990s. The books start in 1993, 1990s, Southeast London. So she has a mobile phone, just about, a brick or something like that, and she is fairly au fait with emails and things like that. But it's not when everything was done via email and using your phone to locate people and all the rest of it. So that means there's more of her walking around and investigating than sort of using a phone, as it were. She is a single parent and she is often quite lonely. And she's one. I remember I had a review, and one reviewer said, when you first meet Hannah Weybridge, she's a bit prickly, and you don't really like her. But as you read on, you hope that she'll become your best friend. My daughter said, "Oh, she's met you then." The prickly and the prickly bit, not the best friend bit. So I think she is, and she's somebody who um, sticks up for the underdog. So whenever she takes on things, it's nearly always because nobody else does investigate what's happening. So obviously, for the first one, the prostitutes. Um, the second one the second book um, involved a lot of homeless people, and the third was about Asian girls going missing and dying. So it was sort of, and I'd had experiences of talking to people about those situations. So Hannah it's quite hard up as well most of the time. So the first time she gets a really big chunk of money from the newspaper that employs her as a freelance, it's a sort of lifesaver. And then she's sort of stuck with them, as it were, because she keeps finding really good stories that nobody else does. And she has a knack of finding. I mean, because everybody sort of says, "Oh, she's a women's magazine journalist. She's no good. She's no good at investigations." But she proves herself that she is. I don't want to say too much more because she sort of evolves and she has a few relationships, so it's not all sadness.
You mentioned the stories are set in the 1990s. Um, did you make that choice because in part that's where your experiences that informed her her stories took place, or could it have taken place at any time since the 90s, but you wanted to kind of give it a unique setting, I guess, because it occurs to me that a lot of stories are either set in a period way and could have been like, could be like the Victorian era, World War, the first half of the 20th century, like Foyle's War type stuff. But then you don't tend to get many stories written today that are set 30 years ago, or as a child of the 90s myself, saying stuff that took place 30 plus years ago makes me feel older now as well. But um,
No, I think basically it was because I did the first interview then, which I based the first book on. So I started there, and that was the 1990s, 1993. So that's why I did it. I did think about jumping, but then I thought, oh, I'd have to sort of fill in too many facts, sort of what happened between X and Y years and all the rest of it. So in fact, it moves fairly swiftly through a couple of years, the whole series. So I'm writing number 7 now, and it begins in 1995, and that's the end. That's the end of that series, number 7. So, so yes, it was a considered decision to set them in the 90s. However, there, yeah, I won't say anymore. That's too much of a giveaway.
well, we
Too
wouldn't
much of
want
a
to.
spoiler.
Yeah, no spoilers here. Um, as a side note to that, then, did you find were there any challenges in or pacing challenges, if you want to, for want of a better term, to setting it in the 90s? Because something that's written, you know, that takes place today, the 2020s or in the 2010s, there's a lot of quick fixes, so to speak, in that the detectives or the sleuths or whatever persuasion, they would go online to try and find something, or they're able to whip out their smartphone to take a photo if they're surveilling something like that, rather than using an old photochemical camera or something like that. So
Yeah.
did you find but I say there's it's a lot easier, as it were, in the modern age for a sleuth to apply their trade, whereas in the 90s it was a lot more analog. So how did you handle, again, for want of a better term, the challenges of that? Or did you actually find it quite invigorating to take a step back in time and have
Yeah,
Hannah do things the
I
old-fashioned way,
think
as
it
it were?
was, yes, I did actually. And of course, then she goes out to interview a lot more people. She gets herself into awkward situations that way as well. Um, so she, in the first one, for instance, by the time she's sort of well set in at the newspaper, the first one, they give her, a little lapel camera that she uses. So she does use a camera, but obviously it's not instant. You don't see the pictures straight away. She's got to send it back to the newspaper to get them to print out the photos for her or something. Um, so yeah, so you can't do that, but it is fun, sort of going back and describing what some of the places were like as well, and some of them haven't changed that much either, in London, and some of them have. So it was. She does a lot of legwork. She goes out and walks the streets, as it were.
Yeah.
Not in a prostitute's way.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you said the seventh book you're working on now is the last in the series. Did, did you have a plan from the beginning that, right, it is going to be X number of books and then it's done? Or did you just naturally reach that conclusion as you were progressing through them?
Well, as I said, I started off with number 1, and I had written the first 3 chapters, which are virtually the same as when I wrote them, for the second book. It was the publisher who suggested 3, a trilogy, and then I came up with the 4th one, so it became number 4, and it continued. So I'd published 4 by the time we got to the first lockdown during COVID, and I was actually writing a standalone psychological thriller set in a contemporary book. And I just couldn't do it. I just felt so, well, as a lot of us did, cut off, lonely, miserable. And I thought, I can't do this. I know what I can do. I can go back to when 1990s, which is a happy time, as it were, for me, and find another book. And the fifth book is called Stage Call, and it's set at the Old Vic, or it begins at the Old Vic. And the Old Vic has a special place in my heart. It was a place that my mum was born in Waterloo, and my mum and my grandmother used to go to the theatre there. My mum had gone to the Italia Conti Stage School as well, so that was the link. And I always felt, oh, when I go there, I think, oh, my mum and grandmother sat in here as well. It's lovely. So I love the Old Vic. It's almost my local theatre, I suppose. And I carried on from there. And I actually I used my mum's name for the main character, for the actress who dies. I used my mum's name, and it was dedicated to her. It was a bit sort of going back on a tribute to her as well. So then I wrote last year, 2 years ago now, because I had an accident last year. So 2 years ago, I wrote Murder in the Lady Chapel. And I actually thought, I look at other people's series, and this is no disrespect to people who write huge numbers in their series, but I just thought 7 is a nice number. And I'd already started thinking about 7 being a magic number, and you could finish on number 7. What I am doing is picking up the little breadcrumbs that I left in the other books as well, so that hopefully people will think, oh, that's what that was about, and will know why I had a little smile on my face when I was writing them. So yes, number 7 is the last one, and it has, my idea was probably from book 5, number 7 was the last one.
Are there any other characters in addition to Hannah that have a consistent presence through the series in terms of their participation in her mysteries or or her personal life as well, that you're able to continue those narrative threads, not just for her but for others?
Absolutely, yes. I think I forget who says it, but you should make sure that even your minor characters are really strong, because they will let you down otherwise. You must keep all your characters. So even if they've got a tiny part, they're strong characters. And they've got backstory. You don't necessarily tell the reader the backstory that time, but you know who that character is. And so in the second book, you meet somebody called Lucy, who's one of the homeless people. And then in book, she appears in a few other books, as a minor character again, but she actually becomes quite a major character in book 4, which is Perdition's Child. And for me, I think the characters, years ago, it's a silly story, but years ago, when we were students, we went to see a clairvoyant, and this woman was very old and not very well educated. So her appreciation and how she saw things was quite simple. But what she did say which was quite funny, was that she said, when she's giving readings to people, she sometimes sees the spirits that people want to contact, and she said she sees them and they're saying things like, she's lying, or that is a fib, or tell us some more, this sort of thing. So I see my minor characters a bit like that, and they're all nudging me, saying, oh, go on, come on, let me have a bigger part. Let me do this one, So I have used characters. So my police sergeant, who detective sergeant who she meets in book 2, who is really unpleasant to her at the time, actually develops with her through the series. And another character there becomes sort of friend, from the police. There are other. She has a friend who becomes an MP, and he appears and reappears. So it's because that's how it is in life. You don't see your best friends every week, but a few months later, you might see somebody or arrange to meet or want to go and pick their brains, as I did. So yes, there are lots of characters who you would know, one gets to know throughout the series.
Do you have a world Bible, so to speak, for all these characters, the settings, and so forth that you can refer to and add to as the series progress?
Yeah, I've actually got a book, a physical book, because it's easier to just write things down really quickly, So yes, I do, and I've got a list of characters for each book as well, so I know who appears when. And so somebody actually said to me when they were reading this, saying, Anne, I can't keep up with all these characters. So I was actually thinking about putting a character list on my website and sort of like, don't read this if you haven't read that, But these are the characters in the last book you read, so don't read forward, because if they're not there, you might think they've died.
Speaking of characters, place is always such an important aspect um, to any of these book series. To what extent is London a character in the Hannah Weybridge books?
I think it's a really strong character in the books, because it is London. You go to places in London. There are historical places. There are obviously, House of Commons or something, but the streets, where she walks, it is London. You could go down and you could almost follow a map with her and see what she sees. It was quite interesting because one critical review I had, and it was a man who'd been in the army who was now a journalist. I don't know who he was. And he said, I'm a journalist and I have never been invited to these places, for press receptions or things like that. And I thought, tough luck, mate, because I haven't written about anywhere that I haven't been to. So when I mention Simpsons in Strand, there are a couple of meals she has there and meetings. I actually went there with my oldest granddaughter, and we went there to do a review of, lunch with en famille type thing. But the manager there took us round to all the sorts of nooks and crannies of Simpsons and gave us a wonderful tour and lots of information. And I used some of that in my book, although it was a different time. He was telling me the historical details. So I have been, you can see Simpsons, you can see Strand Palace Hotel is another one. There's a pub called The Ship on Borough, I think it's Borough High Street, that she goes to. You could find the George Inn, which is a very famous pub, which again is off Borough High Street. Southwark Cathedral, all these places are there. London is a big character, well, a huge character.
I'd like to move on to talking about your process for writing. Now, whether it's a new Hannah Weybridge novel or any other of your works, do you start off with an outline of the plot, a beat by beat breakdown or chapters, or do you tend to just enter the jungle with a machete and, cut your narrative way until you get to the end?
Good question. So for different things, I work in a different way. When I write I also write flash fiction. And when I write anything short, I just churn it round in my mind, go for a walk in the park, think about it, and eventually I get it and then pare it down to the right number of words and all the rest of it. And with short stories, I think about the short story an awful lot before I. When I came and when I was doing my non-fiction books, um, it was always, by to get them published, you gave them a chapter by chapter analysis, and sometimes it was down to chapter paragraph, so it was really easy to write the book because knew exactly what you were putting in there. When it came to writing novels, I am a complete and utter by the skin of your pants person. I I always start off with an image. So there's an image I have of either a murder or a setting or something like that. I start off with the image, and then I think, where, as it's progressed, where is Hannah in all this? Or does she see it or not, as the case may be? And work on from there. When I was as I am working on number 7, I wasn't quite sure where it was going at all until I started. And to be perfectly honest, that is how I usually know the beginning, although that does change sometimes. And I probably know the end, although that too changes. But the middle is just a mess. And I don't write consecutively. So I might write a chapter here and a chapter. I think, or if something comes to me, I think, well, this is a really good chapter. Write it, and it's completely out of sequence. And it may also get then dumped because it is out of sequence and doesn't work at the end of it. So I sort of think of it as I used to do wood turning, and it was really wonderful. You just had a chunk of wood, and you just use an electric lathe and model something, and I made loads of salad bowls. It's really great. But that's what it's like. It's like sort of chipping away until you find until you reveal what's underneath. And it's also like excavating or a body, really. And I feel that, I sometimes I've got the head, but the head's connected to a foot or something like that. And I have to get all the bits out and lay them out in in a proper fashion so that I can see the whole body, as it were. So I might, and I start off with the head, but then write about the toes or something like that. So I'm absolutely used. I'm sure if I spent more time planning, life would be so much simpler, but it isn't. And so what I tend to do as well is once I've got people talk about their first drafts going to their agent. My God, if anybody saw my first draft, they'd give up. They'd give up reading. So what I usually do is I print it out, and then I literally cut and paste it physically so I can see. I use all the floor, working where I can move this to, where I need to move this to. This doesn't work here, move it over there, and that sort of thing. And then obviously go back to the keyboard and work it. And then I still, I do edit a lot, and sadly lose some of my chapters.
Well, yeah, that's part of it, isn't it? Into no sacred cows and all that.
Yeah.
What does your average writing day look like from start to finish?
Um, well, I usually start in the morning, fairly early in the morning. So my best time for working is the morning. Um, but sometimes, if needs must, I will work in the afternoon. Not the afternoon, but more, evenings. I've been known to burn the midnight oil at times as well. I think as long as you write something, you don't have to spend all day staring at the rest of the page because you can't think of anything else to write that day. I review a lot of books and review other things as well. So my writing is also writing reviews, and yeah, writing reviews about things. Books mainly, I stick up theatre things and that sort of thing. So it's varied, put it that way. But if I can get a good chunk written, I feel really happy.
Yeah,
A good chunk of the book.
It's quite satisfying, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
To pivot again slightly to the I suppose the hard graft side of things, really. What is your current status with regards publisher, agent, and so forth? Have you been able to go down the traditional representation and publishing route, or have you, as new options and new technology has opened up, have you been able to dabble into self-publishing, self-promotion, and things like that?
Yeah. Well, I started off well when I've been published by a lot of different companies. One of which is Bloomsbury, but that was for a non-fiction book. And then Martin Matthew Smith is was an indie publisher and relatively new to the game, I think, when we met, or when he read my first book. Then that was taken over by, well, or joined by some other people, and eventually it closed down. And during that time, I went over to another publisher, um, who published my fifth book. So that was during that time, but the republished the first four. It was another indie publisher, and it did not work well. And in the end, I just thought, this is not worth it. And I got my rights back, and I published them. I redid it all and published them on Amazon because I just wanted them to be there. I didn't. If you go somewhere, I didn't want to wait a year to go through, yes, no, yes, no, and then we'll publish it next year or something like that. I just wanted the books there if anybody wants to buy them, type thing. So I did self-publish, and I called my publishing Urban Urban Fox Publishers, Urban Fox Books, because there's a fox in all my books. I love foxes. There's always a fox. So it's Urban Fox Books. And then when I did the last book it was completely self-published because I, run out the option. I've already published my other ones there. So my designer kept to the same theme for the covers because we'd had the covers from the other ones. And I used an editor and a formatter and all the rest of it to do those. And this one, forthcoming one, will also be self-published. And then who knows?
What were the biggest lessons you took away from your whole experience, positive and negative, of traditional publishing?
Don't always trust people. I think I don't. I think it's quite sad publishing at the moment. You hear lots of sad stories about publishers. And I remember talking to a publisher about my young adult book, and they said, "Wow, that's really great! What a fantastic idea!" And I thought, "Oh, wow," And then I sort of saw the CEO, I think, and I said, "Oh, how can I submit it?" And she said, "Oh, well, you need an agent." And it was just like so dismissive, apart from the fact that people had loved the idea. I'm not saying I may have sold the idea better than I wrote it, for instance, but I think that's quite a sad reflection that nobody's prepared to take risks these days, and even a risk with reading a manuscript like that somebody thought was probably worth reading. And I am an optimist, so I think my optimism is still there. And when you think that the person who actually bought and adapted Bridgerton found one of the books in a charity shop, says it all, really. You never know. Somebody might find one of mine in a charity shop.
Have you found self-publishing quite liberating then?
No, I found it frustrating. I'm absolutely useless at marketing, and the thought of doing Amazon ads just makes me feel sick. It just does. And I hear of people paying so much money, And I think, gosh, you've got to sell an awful lot of books to cover that amount of marketing money. So yeah, I mean, I think the marketing, but I also think that lots of the smaller publishers or indie publishers don't put enough into marketing either. So
So swings and roundabouts then, in terms
yeah,
of more freedom, but more responsibilities and pressures as well.
yeah. To be perfectly honest, I have been lucky because um, with the books, my Hannah Weybridge books, they were, they were accepted as is type thing. Nobody said, "Oh, you can't do that," or "Don't do that," or no, 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 we don't like that. I was very, they just went through, as it were. So um, I was fortunate in that sense that nobody wanted me to rewrite them or, "Well, we don't like that character," or something like that. So I
Okay.
have done well in that sense. I
And
haven't had to fight for my characters or scenes or anything.
as we start drawing this interview to a close, are there any other of your works you'd like to highlight for the audience?
Um, well, most of my non-fiction is almost out of date. Non-fiction gets out. I wrote Applied to University, The Essential Guide, and that was a bestseller for that time. For that group and that time, that publisher and that time. But it's out of date now, so I wouldn't bother. I wouldn't really bother with them. I have two collections of short stories, which are published by Loom Books, which has been taken over by Joff Publishers. So I've got those. That obviously short stories are always stand the test of time, hopefully. And of course, do look out for my young adult novel if it ever gets published, which is called The Gift.
Something to maybe come back onto the podcast to talk about then. One of the last questions. When all is said and done, and you'll be looking back on the seven Hannah Weybridge novels, on your multiple short stories, and all the other associated works you have done, are doing, and will do in the next few years. What will you hope or intend your legacy as an author to be?
Well, I hope one day my granddaughter, the oldest one, learns to love books and reads them. Although she did read the young adult book for me and was my, as she calls it, my editor. She was there actually for authenticity rather than rather than being my editor. So I'd love her to be able to read them. But I think I've actually what I have achieved and what does please me is that I meet people who actually really love the books. So they might not be selling millions or anything like that, but there are lots of people who actually like and really enjoy reading them and talking about. Sometimes I think they know my books better than I do. They're really good at it. It's sort of like, and when she does this, whoa, and it was very funny when I completely self-published the last one, and a man I know and quite a lot of men do read my books. It's not just women or anything. And he said to me, "Oh, I just read your last book, Anne, and it was very good. I feel that your new publisher has, has done a lot of work for you." And I said, "Yes, she did." And he looked at me and I said, "It's me." And he went, "Oh, I'm so sorry." I said, "No, that's a compliment. I'll go with it." It's like, and then I met another woman who I didn't know her at all, and it was in the church where my last book is set. The murder is set there, and she said to me, "Oh, and somebody bought me this for Christmas. Would you walk round with me and talk about the book and the characters as we go round?" And it was such a lovely thing to do, and it made me feel fantastic. So I think I can go with that.
Excellent. And what advice would you give to budding writers these days, based on your experiences?
Well, read, write. I mean, I have been to writing groups when people have actually said, I'm writing a child's book. I'm writing this book for, I say, what age group? And they go, oh, and they can't give the age group. And then they say, you say, oh, if you've got children, they haven't got children. Do you read children's books? No. There is absolutely no point in thinking you can do that without reading. And you've got to read, 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 and read rubbish as well. If you don't like it, it doesn't matter, because you might see something in your own writing that other people might not like. I think it's so important to read. If you do nothing else, read. And also to practice writing and writing in different genre, different voices, because it took me for ever such a long time to actually find the right voice for writing. And I think that's it does. Some people may be blessed that they're born with it, I don't know, but it took me a while to hone those skills to find a voice that worked.
So I'll be putting links in the description below. But where can listeners find out more about yourself and your works?
So, well, I have a website which is annecoatesauthor.com. So that's that. There's a small profile on Amazon, and you can order books from bookshops. They can get them in. Some bookshops might they're very unlikely to have them in, so it's much, but but you can get them ordered in. Um, you can also order them from Waterstones, and there's another big company that does them as well. Often gives a discount, so they're there. Please look.
Well, Anne, thank you so much for your time today. It's been really interesting finding out more about the world of Hannah Weybridge and your own experiences as well. But yeah, just I really appreciate your time. Good luck with the seventh to finish off the series and your work on the gift. And yeah, so that remains to say to everyone out there, please, if you enjoyed this, please share, like, review, comment, subscribe. And once again, Anne, thank you so much for your time and speak to you soon.
Thank you very much. Bye.